good to see everyone. Happy Juneteenth today. Really excited to have Michael Tuso on. Michael, thanks so much for joining us today. I'm Ted Blosser, CEO of WorkRamp. We have a really cool agenda with Michael. Just to give you some background on Michael, we'll go into a deep dive of his background. He's a director of revenue performance at Chili Piper. If you don't know what Chili Piper is, it's one of the top inbound lead conversion solutions on the market. Super cool solution to help you drive more qualified leads. You'll learn more about the company as Michael jumps into it. And also here at WorkRamp, if you're not familiar with WorkRamp, we are one of the leading LMS providers. We help enable and train your go-to-market teams, your employees, and also your customers as well. But without further ado, we will jump into the agenda and then hand it over to Michael here. And we're going to have a fun dialogue today. It's a nice Friday. It'll be pretty relaxed and we'll have a lot of fun. In terms of the agenda, we're going to go through 4 things. First, we're going to talk about how you hire to move the middle. This is the theme of what we're going to talk about today is how do you take these middle performers and actually transform them into your top performers, because they're so close and there's a lot of tactics and strategies that Michael's going to share to really work on this core middle group of your sales team members. We're also going to be talk about how do you build the playbook for this middle. And then also one really interesting thing about Chili Piper, if you don't know this, is Chili Piper really has pioneered remote work. They're 100% distributed team. So it was no sweat to move into the pandemic mode for them because they've been doing it for so long since their infancy. So we're going to talk about how do you do enablement in a remote world, because Michael's one of the foremost experts on that. And then we'll close it with some rapid fire questions that we received during the registrations as well. And so what we'll do is jump into Michael's background. I was telling Michael, I'm so jealous if you don't know Michael, he is one of the most prolific people in the industry. Also on LinkedIn, I was jealous. He 10x's all of my likes and comments on LinkedIn. So I was actually picking his brain on his suggestions. But Michael, thanks so much for joining. Let's jump into your background a little bit, and I'll go into full video mode here as we jump into. But why don't you give us your background and how you made it into the world of revenue performance?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me. I'm really excited about all of the topics that you just shared, and I'm happy to talk a little bit about my background as well. So I actually started my career, sort of one of my first jobs out of college was running a statewide political campaign in a swing state. I'm from North Carolina. So that was super, super intense, taught me a lot about fundraising. Sort of really enjoyed that aspect of it, and basically a friend got me into sales. I was sort of burnt out at the end of the political campaign, and I had recently graduated from college, and in my senior year I studied abroad, and thought I'd figure out a way to fuse those 2 things of my sort of recent learnings around fundraising with my desire to live abroad and travel. And so I basically got an entry level sales job working for a large corporation, selling just like an SDR would at any organization today, and sort of quickly grew into an SDR manager, moved back to the States, and yeah, I've been in tech sales ever since. So that's how I got started in sales.
Awesome. And then maybe walk us through your time at Chili Piper so far, the role itself, the team structure. We'd love to hear a little bit more about the details heading into Chili Piper, or any of the formative years from the previous companies that kind of got you into the career before we jump into some of the first topics.
Yeah, absolutely. So, as far as how I got to Chili Piper, I was a customer of Chili Piper before I started working here. And I always sort of had this nagging question, if I came into a really tiny company and helped scale all of the processes around hiring, enablement, training the sales team, coaching, And that's exactly what I've been able to do over the past 2.5 years at Chili Piper. So I'm still doing the same things that I wanted to do in coming here. And it's been a blast building out the SDR team, the account executive team, and the account management team, and all of the sales processes for all of those teams there. So that's how I came to specifically work at Chili Piper.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, with that, we'll get into one of the first topics, and actually one of my favorite topics too, about hiring to help move the middle. In our pre-call, you had such a great answer to this. You talked about how the best way to move the middle is to make sure you hire the best people, right? Maybe you could walk us through this tip about how you hire around getting the best sales reps in the door so that you can make sure that moving the middle is actually something that you can do, or something you might not even need to do.
Yeah, absolutely. So much of what happens on the sales floor is derivative of what's going on in the hiring process, and you really can't unlink those two things. So very frequently, when it comes to the topic of coaching the middle, we all know that it's really important to move that section of performers. And the reason for that is because you've identified those people as the people who have the capability to do the role, but need the coaching support and mentorship to perform at their optimal level. And, you know, I very rarely walk into organizations that have a really good coaching program around enabling and coaching these people to get to the next level in their careers. Very rarely do I see that. And so I think a lot of it comes from hiring in general. And so, you know, the era of gut check hiring, you know, we're seeing it with questions around diversity. We're seeing it with getting the right people in seats. We can see it in the statistics every year that we see that we don't do anything about, which is 50% of salespeople or more are missing their quotas every single year, and we still don't do anything about it. And so, you know, that is derivative very much so of what we're doing in the hiring processes and what we're doing to coach, enable, train, and lead them to be better at their jobs. And so what I mean by that specifically is by identifying the key things that you think causally, not, you know, oh, I have a gut check about this feeling. You know, so many times people get out of the interviews and I have sort of bad memories about this, but like you come out of an interview and what did you think? What did you think? You know, and it's there's nothing substantial there. And so what I really always encourage people to do is to be less gut check and more empirical with your hiring processes. And so, you know, if you go to the doctor and say, my arm is broken, they're not going to give you, you know, penicillin. So it's like we need to understand the causal relationships about what's going on in the hiring process and how that directly at least correlates to performance. And we aren't even measuring those things over time. And so what are some things that we specifically look for? At Chili Piper, we try to make this very concrete on coachability and sort of that aptitude for learning, and then also existing skill set. Like, you know, I heard a statistic the other day by an AI company in the sales realm that you basically can tell how someone's going to do if they're in this sort of middle, you know, lower, or going to be, you know, good at sales after 17 days of ramping. Wow. The problem is that we're not enabling the people after that 17 days, you know, maybe the people who are in a good fit, you know, figure their way out of a company, but then we don't do enough for those people who are a good fit for sales and could be good, you know, at sales in order to get to their best level. So like I was saying, at Chili Piper, we try to make the hiring process extremely concrete. So
are
things
there,
like,
yeah. I was going to ask are there maybe you could walk us through the specific hiring process and anything that's not super confidential. We always debate this internally at WorkRamp, where where sometimes we debate, hey, should we get this all condensed in one day, go back to back 5 30-minute sessions, make a call, or should we spread this out across multiple groups? Maybe give us some specifics around the hiring tactics that you would recommend there.
Absolutely. And I think that the important piece of the debate is making sure that it's not just intuition, it's not just I think, but that it's tied to performance and it's tied to metrics and it's tied to outcomes. And so I always encourage people to continue to have these like open debates. So one of the ways that we iterated on this is many people in the selling world, especially in B2B sales today, are spending a lot of their time, at least more and more of their time, writing. So why are we only measuring people and their ability to speak? Writing as a skill set, an objection isn't exactly the same. The methodology is similar through a cold call objection and an email objection for sure. But there are nuances that are different. If you're just going to bucket them all in one thing and say, they're all the same, that's the kind of nuanced thinking that we really need to iron out. Is like, what are the differences between how we coach someone on the phone and how we coach them through email, because they are fundamentally different. And so we test for that in the hiring process. So whether it's like a really simple writing sample or, so getting rid of this gut check coaching, like you want real material to deal with where you can see what's going on and not just, guess or, pontificate about, you don't want to do that. So that's one example. Another example is if you do a role play, you can ask them to do it again based on feedback and see how their ability to implement that feedback went. Do they fold over on themselves? Do they blame you? Do they blame the process? There's so many different things that you can do to test and see instead of hope and wait. Once you've hired them, you've made the hire. And, there used to be, I think it was more popular maybe when I was an SDR 1,000 years ago, but I even heard CEOs say this, and it bothers me to this day, is like, oh, our VC said hire quickly and hire or fire faster. And I think that is the dumbest way to approach hiring that you could possibly have in the 21st century. And it's intellectual laziness on behalf of the hiring manager, because they don't know what they're looking for to begin with. So how are you going to coach someone to get better if you don't know what you're looking for, in the process? I almost want to tell those people, you hop on the phones and show me how to do it.
You're totally right. I had a mentor who told me, he said, hey, Ted, every person you hire, you're in charge of their careers. You don't want to mess up their careers, right? Put yourself in their shoes and think about, hey, this is something I'm going to be proud about for the next year, 2 years, 3 years, whatever their tenure is going to be. But if you look at it from that lens, you're much more careful about, hey, this person is now trusting this company to be a shining light on their resume. And it makes you basically approach hiring in a much more careful way. So that's
fun. By the way, that same CEO hired a ton of people. He had to lay off his whole company, and the company ended up failing as a result of that thinking. So there's real implications to not doing that. Whereas the company that's out there really focus on what the right things are, trying to get that right mix of like what is specific to your company and selling in general, or each role, mapping out what you need for each role beyond just selling, like what makes a good content marketer, are you looking for someone that throws spaghetti at the wall, or like someone who measures things out and puts things on the internet that are going to, drive up your traffic to your website? So it's like, it's not just applicable to sales, it's hiring in general, and then it immediately carries over into performance of your company, and you can see it so quickly.
Totally. That's actually a great segue into this next topic, which is you try to hire the best people you can. I love your philosophy around, hey, you never want to fire them, right? If you can hire the best people, you want them to stay as long as they want to stay at the company. But ultimately, at the end of the day, you do have this bell curve distribution on a lot of sales teams, right? You have just your top-notch sales reps who they are just crushing it. They're probably bringing in the majority of the number. You kind of have this bottom tier, which actually a lot of enablement focuses on, which is, hey, how do you take these stragglers, get them off their pips? Hopefully you don't have to put them on pips and move them more into the center. But then you have this center, which is good and they just need kind of a nudge to be the best, right? And a lot of people kind of fall into this realm on a lot of sales teams, right? And they're kind of hovering, and sometimes they blame it on territory or maybe learning the product. But let's talk a little bit about this playbook. So maybe the first portion of this playbook is, how do you take, what's your approach to your top performers taking what they know and then starting to build the playbook for the rest? Like, how do you approach absorbing that and then building that playbook off of it so everyone else can actually partake in it?
Yeah. So in terms of the bell curve distribution, I think you have to have. I mean, at Chili Piper, the bell curve isn't always. It's not always the same person every month that is in that top part of the bell curve. Like depending on the month, that changes very frequently, and I actually view that as a very good thing because it shows something else that we're doing, and around this idea of institutional, like, sort of tribe knowledge. And what I mean by that specifically is, when I worked, and we'll talk about this later with the remote work, but when I worked in the office, so much of it, I'm running around, sort of micro coaching all day long, listening to calls, helping with emails, one-on-ones, like things like that. In the remote world, one of the things that I noticed that we do more is, like, it's like, show me your work through the computer, and we're talking about the work. And I really, really love that because we're talking about performance all the time. And so what we've done with that is we create meetings where it's not an accountability meeting. It's not a boring sales meeting. It's institutional mind share and, like, this collective knowledge, and week over week over week, it compounds. So this happens with cadences and best practices with that. We don't have a million cadences that, like, we're all testing. A few of us test at a time, and we iterate on the company messaging, and we step forward and move forward as a company. People are buying in tribes right now. It's like, why are we not using that collective mind share to sell in tribes? And that has been so powerful. A lot of our sort of competitors in our space, I've sort of anecdotally heard, and a lot of companies I've talked to had a hard time, and I feel for them, especially in the past few months. Our SDR team, and I correlate a lot of this to that mind share structure, actually had one of their best months
Wow.
in both March and April. And I that autonomy that they have and that collective mind share. So specifically what we do with that cadence meeting is we, every Monday, we meet and we talk about cadences, and it's not about what did you do or what are your activity. It's literally for learning. And then every week we iterate on that and get better and better and better as a team on that one topic. And so that's one way that we literally take what's going on with the top performance and we roll it out to the whole company as if that's automated top performers for the other people. Then what I do is, like, so you've got the sort of cadence part automated. What happens in between that first email and the prospect responding? Well, in the old days, you don't know what the person is saying back after the prospect replied. And actually still today, many companies are measuring that or coaching that. So what we started to do was I created a framework for the SDR, or for any of the roles really, but especially the SDRs, and a separate one for the account managers and account executives, for what to do when you get objections through email. Some were COVID related recently. So an AM is trying to hold their base, whereas before they might have been trying to cross-sell and upsell. Now they're trying to prevent churn. So it very much is a different game that they're playing. How am I supposed to do that? Like, as an AM, if I don't have any coaching and training on that? Well, this back and forth through email, working with your sales leader to get that rapid fire feedback is one really good way to kind of hold the line there. And they did an excellent job with that too. So I think if you create this culture of performance, the way I kind of describe it is, like, I want to create an ecosystem of learning within the company that exists with or without me. And that's really the way that you take the mind share of the top performers and you infuse it into the rest of the company.
I love it. Let me dig into that. That's such great, even tactical advice there. How do you even run that meeting? Is that all peer run where it rotates, or is it something that you run and you kind of designate one person to maybe dive into the details a little bit more Because I think the audience would love to hear, hey, how do you specifically run that? And is it completely organic, or is this a little bit more top down and you have that team do it?
So we have two sort of similar meetings like this a week, and one is around cadences and one is around training on a variety of topics. So I lead the training and the CEO leads the cadence meeting, but everyone is very participatory in both of those meetings. So marketing attends, product marketing is there, account management is there, like everyone is at these and one is more training oriented, one is more of like sort of a discussion. Let's look at the metrics, let's see what messaging works, what didn't, how do we up our game as a company. And so for the cadence meeting that the CEO runs, it's really more of just a conversation. Let's look at dashboards together collectively as a team. You know, it's not a top down or a centralized approach where, you know, sales ops, for example, I've been at companies where it just like tells everyone what to do. It's everyone has a part of the process and can see it, and it's very transparent. So that's a collective mind share, and we do it for 30 minutes. Then we look at the cadences themselves. What's the new messaging that we're testing? What works, what doesn't work? You know, we might look at activities. We look at metrics that aren't in the CRM per se, or in the engagement tool. So, you know, how many people in an account do you have to touch for it to convert? Like metrics like that we try to be more granular with. And then in the trainings that I do, we sort of had this question mark, and it said, you know, again, with the centralized thing, you can have someone listen to a training, and, you know, most of the time they can be very boring. Or you could have someone be an autonomous participant themselves and have an active stake in what's happening in the training and performance. So I did the trainings for the past, since I got here, but especially really focused on the past year. And then at the end of 2019, I said, what if we did something a little bit different? What if I had them lead it, but I helped them craft the content, and we made the content world class, but I got the input from them, and then they actually lead it and get buy-in from the peers. So we tested it with a book, Never Split the Difference. If you're in sales and haven't read it, you absolutely should. And it was low-hanging fruit. It's an excellent book. There's amazing concepts in there. It's a 6-hour Audible read. It's a really short book to read. So let's do it. So I had 2 account managers read it. They split the training. The first iteration was okay, but it needed room for improvement. So we dove in and made it directly applicable. And what we did, and this is super key, is that we made the book relevant to Chili Piper and what we do here. So we didn't leave it conceptual. We didn't leave it philosophical. We said, how would you specifically, getting to know is something he brings up in the book. How do you specifically do that with this specific objection that's unique to Chili Piper, to break that down and then make it applicable? And then in the training, of course, everyone is nodding their heads. Oh my God, this is gold. This is gold, because they broke it down to digestible chunks so that it was consumable information. And then it was peer-to-peer led, even though I had a huge stake in crafting the content with them. And then a month later, 2 months later, today, everyone is still sharing that information organically with one another, calling each other out in some cases on it. They're, you know, still talking about those things and using them. And, you know, a lot of it had to do with that, like collective mind share in both of those types of meetings.
I love it. And it's funny. I've been in multiple negotiations recently internally where someone will quote Never Split the Difference. And it's almost like a trump card. It's like, okay, if you read it in that book, I actually agree with that tactic. So
Yeah.
On the same topic about building the playbook for the middle, I want to switch slight gears into manager enablement. And this doesn't have to be just at Chili Piper too. Yeah. I'm kind of curious, what's your philosophy around manager enablement? And then also, do you encourage them to, like, where do you encourage them to spend the time? Is it, hey, go work with your top reps because I just need the revenue? Or is it more, hey, work with your bottom reps? Like, or is it, hey, just focus on everybody, especially the middle? What's your philosophy around manager enablement in the lens of this middle peer group?
It's really interesting. Like, there's a lot of data that supports like people who just do coaching and training for their reps and for their managers do a good job. So just start by doing it. Like, use tools, you build your processes, like just do it. And unfortunately, managers are so frequently overlooked in this process. I personally did not get a formal manager training um, until I was very late, and I had been managing for 5 years, over 5 years. No one ever sat me down and said, "This is how you like manage." They said, um, "You're a top performer. We like you. Here's a job." Right, and that is literally. It's not unique to the company I was working for. It's actually backed by a study of millions of people across, tons and tons of companies. If you haven't looked at the report, go to Gallup's State of the American Manager report, and they have like a very big study that's really easy to read that is supporting all of these things that I'm saying. It's like it's not necessarily bad to take the top performer and promote them to manager, but that thinking alone is bad, because what it takes to be a manager is not what it took to be a rep, and you have to recognize what the differences are. The same way that we were talking about earlier with hiring, you have to take these into consideration with choosing your managers. Then when it comes to if you've selected the right people, how to go about enabling them. Well, very frequently, they're not getting any coaching, they're not getting any training. And what they're going to do, if they don't get that coaching and training, is they're going to go to their team and they're going to say, "Hey, this is what I did to be successful, and you need to do it too." And that is not the way to lead in the 21st century. What you need to do is come up with individualized, customized coaching, tailored plans for that specific person, in order to make them better. And I'll give an example that's very real. I have one rep right now who is very good at next steps and project managing with accounts, and very good at closing the deals because of that. I have another rep who is very good at discovery but struggles with that concept. Why the hell am I going to coach them the same way? And so if I, as a new manager, am just going to go tell those two people to do the same things that I did as a rep, I'm going to get mediocre results. And so what I need to do is have a individualized, customized coaching training plan for those specific people at the specific moment, because that's also dynamic and will change over time. So how do I deliver what that person needs in that specific moment? And that is the crux of manager enablement that everyone is missing right now.
Yeah, and that's spot on too. You're right, because every rep, you're right, it's so heterogeneous where every single rep needs something different. And I'm actually curious, just in your time alone, and a lot of people ask us this from a best practice perspective, because obviously we offer a tool for enablement professionals. But how much time do you spend saying, "Hey, this is for the reps"? Is it 70, 80% this for the managers? What's your best practice in terms of, if you're an enablement professional or revenue performance professional, where would you say a good breakdown is for people?
In terms of like time spent,
Yeah,
or
like time spent, effort spent, programs you're building for the two different types of basically managers and the ICs that you're enabling.
I mean, I put a ton of time into these things. I think that one of the biggest problems in sales today is we dangle out these quotas and we say, "Go hit it," and then we don't tell people how to do it. And if you think about that, like, very often these are young people, they're early in their careers, they are recently graduating, many of them from college, like, and a lot of the SDRs, many teams out there at least, as an example. So they're used to sort of that learning types of environments, and then we don't give it to them when they get in the business world, and it's super weird. I never understood that, how we don't spend more time than we do. Um, there's another real important implication of that, is when you spend the time to develop people, they don't leave you. There's this myth. I hate when people talk about this on social media, that like, CEOs get like scared of people quitting because you train them and then they go on and leave you and things like that. in my experience, backed by data, that could not be further from the truth. If you spend your time growing and developing your team, they will stay with you for the long run. As an SDR manager, one of the highest turnover roles there could be, I had a 90% retention rate at my last job. Currently at Chili Piper, I haven't had someone quit on any of my revenue teams in a year,
Wow.
or longer than a year. And I've heard I heard recently a thought leader say, if someone says nobody's quitting their team, call them out on it, and say it's bullshit. Go talk to my team. They'll tell you that no one has left in it over a year, and I attribute it directly to this enablement of all of these people, and showing them how to actually do their jobs. In the past year, we've also promoted someone to manager as well. And one of the ways that we did it, again, is like breaking down, what are the things that this person needs to do while they're in role, and then what are the things that they need to do to get to the next step, and then what are the things that they need to do in the role to progress at each step to get better and better and better while they're in that new manager role. So one of the things that we had him do was I had him sit in on hiring. I had him sit in on coaching and training. He was super intricately involved in things that I was doing on a day-to-day basis, and sort of had this shadowing opportunity. So I think, like, if you just go, check the box, you were the top performer, and now you're promoted, I think you're sorely mistaken.
Yeah, and I love that concept where if you think about most companies, they think about retention of, hey, what are the perks I give? What are the pay increases I give? And you've hit the nail on the head where it's, hey, if you can develop, especially the millennial-based workforces, if you can develop them extremely well, they're going to want to stay and keep working with you, right? Because you're developing them both intellectually and professionally, right? So that's such a cool approach that you've had.
And here's my thing with perks. Like, I used to work at a perk company. I don't have anything against
Everyone likes perks.
perks. Yeah, they're nice to have.
Yeah.
But if all you're flaunting is a perk, it kind of makes me question, like, is am I like getting what I'm buying right now? Is there something missing? Like, what are you covering up about the job? Like, I think if you're showing like how I'm going to actually grow in the role, and like how the job is really great for someone, and how the company is actually really awesome, and that, by the way, is not defined by how many spiffs you have, or how much money you spend on perks or things like that, but you get to the core of why someone comes into a business, which is to work, and then that's really a good setup for them. And then some of the perks that companies are doing are being super innovative with that, and I think it's super cool. I know a number of CEOs that have some of the coolest perk companies like out there, and are really pushing the envelope in terms of like telling employees to take care of their people. So I think that a lot of the perk companies are actually cool, in my opinion. But I think for me, it's like, if you're just dangling ping pong tables at me, I'm like, what's going on with this role that's so exhausting or terrible that you have to show me that. So get to the role first, and then let everything else follow.
Yep. Love it. Love it. Let's go on to one of our last topics before we go into the rapid fire. And Chili Piper has really pioneered. They're one of the pioneers, obviously, in remote work. And the questions we get a lot, especially during COVID, is everybody had to move, obviously, their sales forces to a work from home environment. A lot of enablement professionals were a little bit more lost because they hadn't had to enable in that way. They used to fly everyone to headquarters, train in instructor-led training. But I'm actually curious, this is going to be very open-ended. If you put your hat on of, hey, I'm just a enablement person who needs to learn how to enable remotely, or enablement leader who has to enable remotely, what are the best practices and tips that you would give to these enablement professionals, especially in the lens of, obviously they're thinking about training the top performers and obviously trying to coach up the bottom performers, especially in the lens of the middle of the pack as well?
Yeah, and I know there's tons of opinions out there on this, and it's been super interesting to see. In my experience in the remote context, maybe remote work isn't for everyone. I actually favor a hybrid model where you're able to go to an office, like you have a subscription as some sort of co-working space, but you're free to work anywhere you want, and no one's sort of dictating that. That's sort of how I work with my team. And it works really well for us. I realize every company is different. As far as like remote enablement goes, I think there's a lot of fear around it right now because it's so new. And so the reaction I hear even from customers is like, I was talking to somebody the other day that was like, I can't wait to go back in the office. We have such an office like culture. And I think it's interesting to hear from some of those people, but it's not impossible to do remote work. In fact, I find it a lot easier. It gives me freedom of thought without interruptions to plan really great programs that help people onboard really quickly. And then it also helps me constantly spend time, again, without interruption, of how do I deliver continuous education to people in such a way that it anchors their performance and sustains it over time. Whereas in an office, I felt very reactionary. It's like you're running around putting out fires all day long. And so what I've been able to do in working remotely is anchor performance where I want it to be instead of reacting to every problem that comes up with enablement. And so for me, that has been a world of difference. When you're not reacting to problems all day long, but you're actually able to come up with strategies, playbooks, plans, collaborate with other people. On my Zoom calls, I don't really I get straight to, we get straight to the point on a Zoom call. There's not sort of water cooler chat. I mean, if I need water cooler chat, I'll, call a friend. I don't really need to do that at work. So, I'm sorry people missed that part of it, but yeah, I found it a lot more productive and actually more freedom of distraction. And to me, that's really important. And then the enablement program, as a result of that remote culture, has been very fast, very efficient, very collaborative, and some of the best feedback I've gotten in my career. And so to the people that are skeptical about it, my sort of first reaction is sort of like, try giving it a shot, at least while you have to do a good job, because I think that there's a lot you can learn. Even if you do end up going back to the office, I think you can learn a lot in this context where we are right now. And I mean, regardless, everything that's going on with remote work right now, the disruption that we're seeing, many of those impacts are going to be long lasting. So might as well adapt to them now.
Yeah, and actually to dive into specifics around that, what do you think's like a good cadence? I have a lot of enablement leaders who say, hey, should I dial it back a little bit more because a lot of people have a lot on their plates now? Or do you actually dial it up a little bit and add more structure? I'm kind of curious if you, let's just say, look at a given month, the month of, let's say, July coming up. How would you look at the enablement programs, especially in a remote world? Is it very structured, ad hoc, frequency? Love to hear some of the details you recommend.
Yeah, so one of the things that I think is missed in enablement is reinforcement. So that's usually the thing I'm looking at more than the structure. So what I mean by that is, you can teach a concept. It doesn't mean that the person is able to go and do what you ask them to do. And so even when I was onboarding like SDRs and AEs, at previous companies, that's the thing that I would really focus on is not just here's your training, go and do it. It's like the reinforcement that comes after to make sure that they really truly understand. And I think to your question about like how much, I think it depends on the context. Like in March, my team is like pretty overwhelmed with like, the news and kind of worried and fearful and migrating, trying to get back to their family. I was like, what you need from me, I will be there, and that's what we'll deliver on. A couple of months have gone by, things are ramping back up, getting back to normal, things like that. And now we're spending more time wrapping some structure around people that we'll be hiring and onboarding in July. I have really kind of toned down being like really heavy-handed with like enablement and putting too much on people's plate. It is sort of aggressive, and there is a lot that they need to learn, because I think it's important to kind of get people into speaking to customers and prospects very, very quickly. But I do it in a way where they're not unprepared for those conversations. At some point, the call and cold calling or emailing reluctance, you got to just kind of be like, okay, I need to jump in. But on another hand, I see leaders not equipping people with quite enough information to be successful, and so they become overwhelmed and think that sales isn't for them, and then it doesn't work out. So I think there's this like sort of perfect balance between giving people enough information that they need, but also not allowing them to be reluctant to speak to people on the phone or email people or engage in that direct selling time within that first 30 days.
Yep.
I think they need to hit the ground running, basically.
Cool. Yeah, that's super helpful advice. I know a lot of people, just even at tactical level, love to hear what the best practices are there. Let's jump into my favorite portion, rapid fire questions. We're just going to go through a series of questions that the audience submitted ahead of time during the registration process. We also have a few live questions here from the crowd. I actually have one really good one from the crowd. What is the core material of Never Split the Difference that you found so helpful? Do you have any tidbits of your favorite portion?
Yeah, so probably the top two would be what I mentioned, like getting to know. So frequently we frame questions seeking a yes, but when you get to know, you can actually get more information. So an example would be like, I had a friend, this always sticks out to me, a non-sales example. We were at a restaurant and she goes, watch this. And she says, would it be impossible if we could actually sit at that table over there? And then the waiter goes, it wouldn't be impossible. And then we got the table that we wanted. But I'm telling you, one of the most effective ways that it's worked in our team is through email. Would it be fair to say that you're no longer interested in this or that you've given up on this project? Our team actually uses it and it works really well. So that's the thing, number one. My second favorite is calibrated questions. Oh my God, it's just so powerful. We think of like, people talk about yes, no questions, open-ended questions. Calibrated questions are the way to go because you can sort of figure out where someone's at. Yeah, so those are two sort of concepts that I really love from that book.
Awesome. Thank you, Cheryl, for that question. Next question: systems or tools you recommend for remote enablement? Give us a couple here.
Systems and tools for remote enablement. I mean, you definitely have to have, the name of the book is Never Split the Difference to that question. So systems and tools for enablement. You definitely have to have an LMS in place, and you should start this early. And the reason why you have to start this early is because it compounds over time. And one of the biggest objections that I get from smaller companies who say, I'm not ready. I don't know if I'm ready for enablement. I don't know if I'm ready for that. Well, it's only going to get more intense over time, and you should start off on the right foot by iterating on that content. And you don't want to do that migration like later on. So start early. If you already have it in like a Google Drive or something like that, I would get an LMS tool is always one of the first things. And the reason why is because it makes you so much more efficient and methodical, with your processes. It's one thing to kind of talk about all these things like we are right now. It's another thing to go and do it. And I think having an LMS really forces you to do that. And then the results directly impact your team. So I definitely recommend that. So we have our SDRs that are ramping for July already like ramped up and set on WorkRamp and using the tool. So definitely check the tool out, even if it's only for learning. Like check it out. You absolutely have to have an LMS. I think for remote, you also have to have tools like Slack and Zoom. Obviously, like those are. I really also a company I really like is Loom because you can shoot quick videos over. So that's another tool that I use. We're also beta testing coaching directly through email that we've been using for remote coaching. It basically started with someone needed help on the SDR team and they were sending screenshots of the email they got from a prospect through Slack. And so now you can basically collaborate directly through email with Chili Piper actually. So we've been using our own tool, and that sort of feature is free. to use right now. I know a lot of companies are hurting, so a good time to try something like that. So that I don't I like to keep it lean with tools, but those are some of the ones I use.
Awesome. Great answer there. And thanks for that advertisement unsolicited there. Next question from the crowd. Motivation. How do you keep your reps motivated when they're remote? Any good tips?
Yeah, absolutely. So with a remote team, um, we don't do SKOs. This is a bit of a sort of non-COVID example, but one of the things we did, we sent the team to Paris and Ibiza, and everyone in the company went. After we hit like a collective revenue goal, we're likely to ramp something similar to that back up. So we don't do boring SKOs or anything like that. That's what we do instead. And so that's thing number one. As far as like motivation, I just like check in with people, see how they're doing. We have like an incredible bond with like the team here that we built. So as far as when everything started going upside down in March, one of the things I said is like, I'm not going to do my usual stuff. I'm going to focus on like what this person needs and provide context and provide like what that person needs on an individual basis. So I think when a lot of people were scared, and I sort of had the thought like we can be scared and don't do anything, or we can lead our way through it. And so we invested in our people, we invested in our products, and we invested in our coaching and training, and it's already paying dividends as we're starting to kind of, jobs are being added back and things like that. So when they saw that leadership, like from the team and transparency, it immediately like alleviated concern and pain for the team, and they were more committed to what they were doing before.
Awesome. One more question here. Oversight. How do you keep an eye on your sales rep, especially since they're remote now?
So a sales leader asked me this recently. He said, we had like a coaching call where it was like a VP of sales, and he was like asking how to lead his team remotely. And he literally asked me, how do you know that they're not taking a 3-hour lunch? And my answer to that is, I don't care how long their lunch break is. Like if this is like another cognitive bias that we need to get over, is like, if someone is taking a 3-hour lunch break and is still able to hit their goals, kudos to you. Like, do your thing. And that's the type of rep that I was. Like, most of the time I was working way more than another person was. But maybe there was a day where I needed to take a 3-hour lunch. My quota was still, or my revenue was still 4x the person that sat next to me. So why are you micromanaging them? So just stop it with that stuff, is my opinion there.
Cool. That's a great answer, because there's a lot of tools out there that can actually look at how many emails are you sending out, what's your daily performance like. Obviously, you can do that in Salesforce, but I like that answer even better. Well, Michael, we're at the top of the webinar. Thank you so much for sharing such good insight with everybody on the call. Were there any last words? If not, we can wrap it up from here.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me on today. It's been great. If anybody wants to connect with me or continue the conversation afterwards, I'm super active on LinkedIn. So you can just add me there. And yeah, thanks so much for having me. It was really fun to talk about all these things. And yeah, hopefully we can connect with some people afterwards.
Awesome. All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining. We will put this online here probably in the next week or two, so you can consume this content on demand or share it with your friends and colleagues. And Michael, thanks again for imparting such great wisdom to the greater community.
Yes, thank you.
All right. See you later, everybody. Have a good Friday.